At an upscale jewelry store in Riverton, a black teenager happily searches for the perfect gift for his little sister. But the moment he steps inside, that joy is abruptly interrupted by the suspicion of the store clerk. And when he accidentally drops a bracelet, her suspicion turns into baseless accusations. Just minutes later, the police arrive, blindly believing her statement and handcuff him. But what they don't know is that this boy has a powerful ally, his mother, and she is about to turn the situation around in a way none of them ever expected. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in Riverton, a peaceful suburban town where life moved at an unhurried pace. Families strolled through the park, children laughed as they raced toward the swings, and neighbors exchanged polite greetings on their way to the local farmer's market. The sun cast a golden hue over everything, making the town seem almost picturesque. But for Jalin Carter, this day was about more than just enjoying the weekend. He had one goal in mind: to buy the perfect birthday gift for his little sister, Aliyah. Jalin had been saving up for months, working extra hours at the local coffee shop, carefully setting aside every tip and paycheck just so he could afford something special. He had finally found the perfect gift: a silver charm bracelet from Belmont Jewelers, the most prestigious jewelry store in town. He had passed by it countless times, pressing his nose against the glass display, imagining the way Aliyah's eyes would light up when she saw it. Today was the day. He clutched his wallet in his pocket, reassured by the weight of the money inside. This wasn't just a purchase, it was a symbol of his love, of everything he wanted to give her despite the struggles their family had faced. As he approached the store, the pristine glass windows gleamed under the sunlight, reflecting the bustling streets behind him. He hesitated for a moment, adjusting his hoodie though it was unzipped, revealing the neatly pressed polo shirt underneath. He was well aware of the way certain people reacted when they saw a young black man in a hoodie. He shook off the thought. Not today. Just walk in, buy the bracelet, and leave. Taking a deep breath, he pulled open the heavy glass door, and a soft chime rang through the store. Inside, Belmont Jewelers was everything he expected: sleek glass display cases, velvet-lined shelves, and rows of gleaming gold and silver under bright, almost blinding lights. The faint scent of expensive cologne and polished wood filled the air. The customers inside were mostly well-dressed older women, their diamond rings catching the light as they admired necklaces and earrings that cost more than Jalin had earned in his entire lifetime. He ignored their curious glances, his focus locked on the bracelet he had come for. Behind the counter stood Margaret Whitmore, a middle-aged white woman with carefully styled blonde hair and sharp, calculating eyes. Her expression was neutral at first, but the moment her gaze landed on Jalin, something in her demeanor changed. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her grip on the counter tightened ever so slightly, and her eyes, once bored, now carried an unmistakable scrutiny. Jalin felt it immediately. That shift. That silent but deafening question that always hung in the air when people like her looked at people like him. What are you doing here? Jalin had seen that look before, had felt the weight of suspicion that clung to him like an invisible chain whenever he walked into places where people thought he didn't belong. But he refused to let it deter him. He approached the counter with a polite smile, pointing at the bracelet displayed in the case. "I'd like to see that one, please." His voice was steady, calm, the way his mother had always taught him to speak when dealing with people like this. Margaret, however, didn't move. She simply folded her arms, tilting her head slightly. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "That one's quite expensive." Jalin's stomach tightened, but he forced himself to keep his expression neutral. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet, showing the neatly folded cash he had worked so hard to earn. "I'm sure," he said firmly. "I have the money right here." Margaret's eyes flicked to the cash, her lips curling slightly as if the sight of it offended her. But instead of relaxing, she seemed to tense up even more. Her fingers twitched near the phone resting on the counter. She didn't move to grab the bracelet. Instead, she let out a low, almost amused scoff. "And where exactly did you get all that money?" Her voice was casual, but the accusation beneath it was sharp as a blade. Jalin stiffened. "Excuse me?" he asked, though he already knew where this was going. Margaret arched an eyebrow. "It's just a lot of cash for someone your age," she said, her gaze never leaving his face. "Did you, I don't know, borrow it from someone? Maybe find it lying around." Jalin's jaw clenched. He inhaled slowly, willing himself to stay calm. He had done nothing wrong. I work at Parker's Coffee House, he said, enunciating each word carefully. I saved up for this. Margaret made a soft noise of disbelief, shaking her head slightly. She hummed, tapping her nails against the counter. And you expect me to believe that? Jalin swallowed the anger rising in his throat. Yes, he said flatly. Margaret let out a dry chuckle, like she had heard a particularly ridiculous joke. Well, I suppose I should be flattered you thought you could fool me, she said, finally moving toward the display case. But I've been working here a long time, kid. I know when something doesn't add up. Jalin's hands curled into fists at his sides. He forced himself to unclench them. This was supposed to be simple. He hadn't come here to be humiliated. Can I just see the bracelet, please? He asked, his patience thinning. Margaret sighed as if he were inconveniencing her, but she finally pulled out the velvet tray and placed it on the counter. Be careful with it, she warned, her tone sharp. It's worth more than what you probably make in a year. Jalin gritted his teeth but didn't say anything. He reached out, gently picking up the bracelet, feeling the cool silver against his fingertips. It was perfect. Exactly what he had imagined. But just as he turned it slightly, admiring the way the charms dangled, the smooth metal slipped between his fingers. The bracelet tumbled to the glass counter with a soft clink, then bounced off, hitting the tiled floor below. The moment it happened, Jalin's breath caught in his throat. Before he could even move to pick it up, Margaret let out a sharp, piercing shriek. "Oh my God! I knew it!" she shouted, her voice slicing through the store like a siren. Every head in the room turned toward them. Jalin's eyes widened. "Wait." Margaret jabbed a finger at him, her face twisted in outrage. "I knew you were up to something. You were trying to pocket it, weren't you? Thought you'd get away with it." Jalin's stomach dropped. "What? No, Margaret lunged for the store phone, her fingers dialing frantically. "Get the police here now," she barked into the receiver. "We've got a thief young black male hoodie, tried to steal from us." Jalin stood frozen, the weight of her words slamming into him like a freight train. The room had gone silent, but the air was thick with something heavy: judgment, suspicion, fear. He could feel the eyes of every customer drilling into him, the way their postures shifted, the way a woman clutched her purse a little tighter. His mind screamed at him to say something, to defend himself, but he knew. No one in that room would believe him, not over her. Then, in the distance, the wail of approaching sirens pierced the air. The sirens grew louder, an eerie wail slicing through the once quiet afternoon. Jalin felt his pulse hammer against his ribs as the weight of the moment crashed down on him. He had known this could happen. He had seen it before on the news, in whispered conversations, in the fear that crept into his mother's voice whenever she reminded him to be careful when he left the house. But knowing it could happen and living it were two entirely different things. His breath was tight in his chest, his fingers twitching by his sides. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to run, to fight back against the blatant lie spilling from Margaret's lips. But he did none of those things. He stood still, forcing himself to breathe, because anything else, any sudden movement, any misplaced word could make this worse. Margaret's voice was sharp and commanding as she spoke into the phone, her free hand still clutching the counter as though she were the victim in all of this. "Yes, right now. I need officers at Belmont Jewelers immediately. He's still here. He's trying to deny it, but I caught him red-handed." Her eyes flicked to Jalin, her lips curling into a smirk of pure satisfaction, like she had been waiting for this moment, like she had been expecting it. "And hurry," she added, lowering her voice just enough to sound urgent. "He's getting aggressive." Jalin's stomach lurched, his fists clenched at his sides. Aggressive. He had barely spoken. He hadn't even moved. Yet she was painting a picture that everyone in the room was more than willing to believe. He could feel it in the way the other customers backed away, their gazes shifting between him and Margaret, none of them questioning her words. A woman in a floral dress pulled her purse closer. An older man in a suit shook his head, as though this was nothing more than confirmation of what he already assumed to be true. Jalin swallowed hard, glancing at the bracelet on the floor, the same one that had slipped from his fingers only moments ago, now a symbol of something far more dangerous. He took a shaky breath and looked Margaret dead in the eyes. "I didn't steal anything," he said, his voice low, controlled, but laced with barely restrained fury. "You know that." Margaret scoffed, folding her arms across her chest. "Oh, please, don't play innocent now. You thought you could get away with it, didn't you? But I know you're kind." She spat the last words with thinly veiled disgust, her gaze flicking to his hoodie, his jeans, the sneakers on his feet. "You walk in here, looking around like you belong, but the moment I turn my back, you think you can help yourself. I see it all the time." Jalen's skin burned. My kind. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. He didn't have to ask what she meant. He already knew. Margaret shrugged, feigning innocence. "What? You're acting all offended now. I'm just stating the facts. Stores like this deal with thieves every day, and I don't need to guess which ones are the problem." Jalen felt something snap inside him, something cold and sharp and suffocating. He wanted to scream, to tell her how wrong she was, how disgusting, how vile, but the words choked in his throat. It wouldn't matter. Nothing he said would matter. Because in Margaret's eyes, in the eyes of everyone watching, he was already guilty. The store's glass doors swung open with a rush of air, and 2 uniformed police officers stormed in. The room shifted, the energy crackling like a live wire. Conversations died instantly, and suddenly, all attention was on Jalen. "There he is," Margaret cried, pointing at him like he was some fugitive off a wanted poster. "That's him. He tried to steal from me." Jalen barely had time to react before one of the officers, a tall, burly man with graying hair, his badge reading Sergeant Blake, took a step toward him, already reaching for his handcuffs. "Sir, I need you to put your hands where I can see them." Jalen's breath caught. His fingers twitched at his sides, but he didn't move. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to run, to protect himself, but he forced himself to stay still. Blake's tone sharpened. "I said, hands where I can see them." "I didn't do anything," Jalen said, his voice steadier than he felt. Margaret let out an exaggerated scoff. "Are you seriously going to stand there and argue after I caught you? After you?" She gestured wildly toward the bracelet on the floor, tried to pocket that. "The nerve of you people." Jalen flinched. "You people." The second officer, a younger man with sharp eyes, Officer Doyle, hesitated. His gaze flicked between Jalen, Margaret, and the discarded bracelet. Unlike Blake, he wasn't moving in immediately. Jalen noticed the flicker of doubt in his expression. Doyle wasn't completely convinced. But it didn't matter. Blake was already stepping closer, handcuffs at the ready, his face void of hesitation. "Son, I'm going to need you to step outside." Jalen felt his pulse hammering against his skull. His breathing was shallow. His mind raced through the worst possible outcomes, and every single one ended the same way with him on the ground, with someone shouting, with a headline that started with "Black teen arrested after attempted theft." He knew how these stories played out. Margaret's smirk widened, her arms crossing tighter over her chest, her posture relaxed. "She thinks she's already won." Jalen exhaled sharply, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Call my mother." Blake scoffed, shaking his head. "Kid, you can make your phone call at the station." "No," Jalen said, firmer now, his voice carrying through the store. "Call my mother. Now." Margaret rolled her eyes. "Oh, sure. Let's call Mommy," she said sarcastically. "And who is she? A public defender? Some activist? What's she gonna do? Tell you to scream for justice?" She let out a dry, humorless laugh. Jalen ignored her. He reached into his pocket, not fast, not sudden, just enough to take out his phone. He dialed with steady hands. "Mom, I need you at Belmont Jewelers. Now." Blake's brows furrowed slightly, but he still didn't seem concerned. Doyle, however, shifted. He must have noticed something in Jalen's voice, the way he wasn't begging or pleading, the way he wasn't panicking despite the danger he was in. No, Jalen wasn't afraid. He was waiting. Minutes stretched like hours. The air in the store was thick, the tension palpable. Margaret tapped her foot impatiently. Blake sighed, his grip on the handcuffs loosening only slightly. Doyle checked his watch. The customers had mostly backed away, whispering to each other, some pulling out their phones. And then the door swung open. A woman walked in, tall, commanding, the kind of presence that made an entire room fall silent. A navy blue suit hugged her frame, Her heels clicked against the tile with precision, and her sharp eyes, so much like Jalen's, scanned the scene before her. She held up a badge, flashing it with an authority that left no room for doubt. "I'm Dr. Simone Carter," she announced, her voice cutting through the room like steel. "Chief of Police for Riverton PD." She turned, her gaze locking onto Blake. "And this," she said, gesturing to Jalen, "is my son." The room went dead silent. For a long, agonizing moment, the store was silent. The weight of Simone Carter's words pressed down on everyone in the room, suffocating and inescapable. Jalen barely breathed, watching as recognition dawned on the officers' faces. Blake stiffened first, his grip on the cuffs faltering, his body suddenly not as sure, not as dominant. Doyle, who had already shown hesitance, exhaled sharply, his posture shifting in a way that suggested he was calculating his next move carefully. But it was Margaret who reacted the most violently. Her expression contorted, the smirk vanishing in an instant, replaced by something ugly: shock, anger, desperation. She blinked hard, as if hoping she had misheard, as if refusing to accept that this young black man, whom she had so easily condemned, was the son of a woman who outranked every single person in that room. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Debbie, what?" She stammered, her voice no longer carrying the same venom, now laced with something dangerously close to panic. Simone didn't so much as glance at her. Her eyes remained on Blake, piercing, unwavering. "Sergeant," she said, her voice even, measured, but carrying a dangerous undercurrent, "I assume you have a reasonable explanation for why my son is standing here, surrounded, while you reach for your handcuffs before even asking him a single question." Blake shifted on his feet. His jaw tensed. His hand slowly lowered, but he didn't let go of the cuffs entirely. "Ma'am, we received a call reporting an attempted theft," he started, voice clipped, defensive. "We responded accordingly." Simone tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing. "You responded accordingly. And by accordingly you mean walking in here, seeing a young black man, and immediately deciding he was guilty." Blake bristled. "That's not what happened." "Really?" Simone said coolly. "Because it looks a whole lot like that to me." Margaret finally found her voice, and it snapped with the sharpness of someone desperate to regain control. "I called because he tried to steal from me," she blurted, pointing at Jalen, voice rising in pitch. He dropped the bracelet and was clearly about to take it. "I stopped him just in time. And I did what any responsible citizen would do: I called the police before he could run off with my merchandise." Simone exhaled slowly, her gaze moving to Jalen for the first time since she arrived. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't even tried to explain himself. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes told her everything. The anger simmering just beneath his carefully composed surface. The exhaustion. The frustration. The knowledge that even as the son of one of the highest-ranking law enforcement officials in the city, he was still seen as nothing more than a suspect. She turned back to Blake. "Did you check the security footage?" Blake hesitated. "We were just about to." "No, you weren't," Simone cut in smoothly, deadly. "You were about to arrest him, without reviewing any evidence, without questioning him, without doing your job." Her voice was quiet, but the authority in it was deafening. Doyle swallowed hard, looking between his superior and Simone. His hesitation had already been apparent before, but now, with the weight of the situation fully pressing down on him, it solidified into something tangible. "Mom," he interjected, his voice cautious, controlled, but carrying a tinge of regret, "we should check the footage." Blake's eyes snapped to him, the unspoken betrayal clear. But he couldn't argue. Not now. Not with who was standing in front of them. He exhaled sharply through his nose, jaw tightening. "Fine." Margaret's face twisted in disbelief. "What? No. I told you what happened. You're seriously going to listen to her?" She gestured wildly at Simone, then at Jalen, voice dripping with the same disdain she had carried all along. "You saw him. You saw how he acted. This is ridiculous." Simone finally turned her full attention to Margaret. And in that moment, the weight of her gaze alone silenced the older woman. Margaret's defiance shrank under the quiet intensity of the chief's stare, as if she suddenly realized that whatever power she thought she had in this moment was slipping through her fingers like sand. "Mrs. Whitmore," Simone said, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut steel, Let me make something very, very clear to you. She took a slow, deliberate step forward. You're standing in front of a boy who walked into your store to buy a bracelet for his sister. A boy who saved his own hard-earned money to support your business. A boy who you immediately labeled a thief because you decided, before he even spoke, that he wasn't supposed to be here. She let the words hang in the air, let them sink in, let them wrap around Margaret's throat like a tightening noose. So I hope, for your sake, that security footage tells the story you claim it does. Because if it doesn't, her lips pressed into a thin, deadly line, you will answer for every word you just said. Margaret swallowed thickly, her bravado cracking at the edges. Blake cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Let's check the cameras. No one spoke as the store manager, who had been standing frozen in the background, too stunned to intervene, hurriedly moved to the back, retrieving the footage. It played on a small screen behind the counter, the silent recording displaying the exact sequence of events: Jalin entering the store, speaking to Margaret, handing over his money, the moment the bracelet slipped from his fingers and hit the floor. It was all there. Every second of it. No theft, no pocketing, no crime. Just a 17-year-old boy trying to buy a gift. The silence that followed was suffocating. Doyle sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. Blake looked as though he had swallowed something bitter, his jaw ticking with restrained frustration. Margaret looked as if the floor had been ripped out from under her. Simone inhaled deeply before speaking again, her tone dangerously soft. So tell me, Sergeant, what happens now? Do you still want to arrest my son? Blake said nothing. He knew better. Simone turned to Margaret, her expression unreadable. And you, she continued, tilting her head slightly. Are you going to tell me what exactly you were so certain of? Margaret's lips trembled. She looked from Simone to Jalin, to the officers, then to the customers who were now watching with a mixture of shock, discomfort, and in some cases quiet satisfaction. Her voice faltered. She had no defense. No justification, just the realization that she had her hand too confidently, too recklessly, and lost. Simone gave a slow, knowing nod. That's what I thought. Blake cleared his throat, straightening his shoulders. Mom, he addressed Simone, his voice tight with strained professionalism. I think we're done here. Simone arched a brow. No apology. Blake's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Margaret, however, opened her mouth, still searching for a way to salvage the situation. But there was nothing left to say. Simone exhaled, turning back to Jalin. Come on, baby, she murmured. We're leaving. Jalin didn't move at first. He just stood there, staring at Margaret, at Blake, at the wreckage of what had just unfolded. He wanted to feel relief. Victory. Justice. But all he felt was exhaustion. Because no matter how many times he won battles like this, the war was never ending. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head, and finally turned to follow his mother out the door. As he passed Margaret, he met her gaze one last time. All I wanted was to buy a bracelet, he said, voice calm but firm, the weight of everything that had happened resting behind his words. But I guess I got something more valuable instead. And with that he walked out, head held high, back straight, while Margaret stood frozen, watching the life she once controlled crumble at her feet. As Jalin and Simone stepped out of Belmont Jewelers, the heavy glass door swinging shut behind them, the tension inside the store remained thick, clinging to the air like the aftermath of a storm. The moment should have felt like a victory, a moment of undeniable justice. But as Jalin inhaled the crisp afternoon air, his chest still felt tight, his stomach still knotted with something raw and unresolved. His hands curled into fists at his sides, his fingers aching from how tightly they had been clenched since the moment Margaret had accused him. His mother walked beside him, her presence steady, unwavering, yet he could feel the restrained fury radiating off her in waves. Simone didn't speak at first, her strides purposeful, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. It wasn't until they reached her car, parked a short distance away, that she finally turned to him, her expression unreadable. Are you okay? Her voice was measured, but there was an edge beneath it, something deeper than concern, something laced with the kind of exhaustion that only came from fighting the same battle over and over again. Jalin let out a slow breath, glancing back toward the store. Through the window, he could still see Margaret, standing stiff and motionless behind the counter, her face pale, her eyes darting toward the officers, as if searching for some last-minute lifeline. Blake was stiff, jaw clenched, while Doyle looked somewhere between relieved and ashamed. The store manager, who had been too cowardly to intervene, now looked like he wanted to disappear. The customers who had once been quick to judge were avoiding eye contact, suddenly interested in anything but the fallout of their silent complicity. "I don't know," Jalin admitted finally, dragging a hand down his face. "I should feel better. I should feel like I proved something. Like I won." Simone studied him for a long moment, then exhaled, her features softening just slightly. "Baby, you shouldn't have had to prove anything in the first place." The words hit him harder than he expected. His jaw tightened, and he swallowed around the lump forming in his throat. "Yeah," he muttered, voice heavy. "I know." For a long moment they just stood there, the weight of everything hanging between them. Then, the door to Belmont Jewelers swung open again, and Jalin's eyes flicked up just in time to see Margaret step outside. His entire body tensed. Margaret hesitated, her hand gripping the strap of her purse so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She looked different now, smaller somehow, stripped of the confidence and superiority she had carried so effortlessly before. Her face was stiff, her lips pressed together like she was waging an internal war. It was clear she had something to say, something she had debated in the moment since the security footage had exposed her. Jalin's heartbeat drummed loudly in his ears as he waited. Margaret took a single step forward, then another. Then she opened her mouth and closed it again. Her throat bobbed. Her eyes flicked to Simone, then back to Jalin. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she let out a breath and shook her head, her expression shifting into something resembling pathetic, wounded pride. She started, but no words followed. She didn't apologize. She didn't admit she had been wrong. She just walked away. Jalin let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Figures." Simone scoffed, folding her arms. "Cowards never know how to say they're sorry." Jalin watched as Margaret disappeared down the sidewalk, her posture stiff, her pace quick, like she was trying to outrun the consequences of her own actions. He should have expected it. He should have known that people like her never truly faced what they had done, never really acknowledged the harm they caused. But it still stung. Blake and Doyle exited the store next. Doyle glanced at them briefly before looking away, his jaw tight, his hands flexing at his sides like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Blake, on the other hand, barely looked at them at all. He just nodded stiffly in Simone's direction, a silent acknowledgement that he had lost this battle, and then turned on his heel, stalking toward his squad car. Jalin exhaled slowly. "So that's it?" Simone glanced at him. "For now," she said simply. Jalin turned back toward Belmont Jewelers one last time. Inside, the customers had gone back to browsing, as if nothing had happened. As if just minutes ago they hadn't stood by, watching a black teen get accused of a crime he didn't commit, waiting to see what would happen to him. He clenched his jaw, then shook his head. "I just wanted to buy a bracelet," he muttered. Simone sighed, reaching out to squeeze his shoulder. "I know, baby." Jalin took a deep breath, then exhaled, his shoulders finally loosening, if only a little. He turned away from the store, away from Margaret, away from the lingering weight of everything that had just happened, and walked toward the car. Justice had been served, but the battle wasn't over. It never really was. As the car door shut behind him, Jalin leaned back in the seat, exhaling sharply. The weight of everything that had just happened settled deep in his bones, exhaustion threading through his muscles. Simone sat beside him in silence, hands gripping the wheel, her nails pressing faint crescents into the leather. The hum of the engine filled the quiet space between them, but neither of them moved, neither of them spoke. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had happened. People walked by. Cars pulled into parking spots. The sky remained the same shade of indifferent blue. But inside, Jalin could still feel the heat of Margaret's accusation clinging to his skin, the judgment in the eyes of those who had stood by and watched, doing nothing. Simone finally broke the silence. "Are you sure you're okay?" Her voice was softer now, lacking the sharp authority she had wielded inside the store. This was different. This was a mother speaking to her son, not a police chief demanding accountability. Jalan stared at the dashboard, his fingers drumming lightly against his jeans. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice rough. "I feel angry. And tired. And like none of this really matters, because tomorrow it'll be someone else in my place, and no one's going to stop to ask if they're okay." Simone inhaled deeply, her hands tightening on the wheel before she forced herself to relax. "I know," she murmured. "It's a cycle that keeps repeating. But today we fought back. Today you didn't let them break you." Jalan let out a bitter laugh. "Didn't I? I stood there listening to that woman talk about me like I was nothing, while everyone else just let it happen. And even when she got caught, even when she knew she was wrong, she still couldn't say the words." He turned to Simone, frustration burning behind his eyes. "How do you fight back against something that deep? How do you make people see you as a person when they've already decided you're not?" Simone didn't answer right away. She stared straight ahead, lips pressed together in a tight line. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but unshakable. "By refusing to let them define you. By making sure that no matter what they see when they look at you, you know who you are. By showing them, over and over again, that they're wrong even when they refuse to admit it." Jalan clenched his jaw, looking out the window. It wasn't enough. It never felt like enough. But maybe it was all they had. The silence stretched between them again, but it was different this time. Heavier, more settled. Then Simone reached into her purse, pulling out her phone. Jalan frowned as she scrolled through her contacts before pressing a name and lifting the device to her ear. "Who are you calling?" he asked, wary. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she waited, her expression unreadable as the line rang. Then, after a pause, she spoke. "Cynthia. I need a press release prepared immediately. Yes, regarding Belmont Jewelers." She glanced at Jalan before continuing. "I want a full investigation into the call that was made to dispatch, and I want an internal review on Sergeant Blake. I also want a public statement on racial profiling and misuse of emergency services. And make sure the media knows exactly what happened today." Jalan's eyes widened slightly. "You're really going after them?" Simone lowered the phone slightly, giving him a knowing look. "You think I was just going to let this go?" Jalan exhaled, something between relief and disbelief settling in his chest. He had spent so long watching stories like his unfold the same way someone gets profiled, humiliated, accused, and then, even when the truth comes out, nothing changes. But this felt different. This felt like a fight that wasn't ending the moment they walked out of that store. He nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. "Good." Simone returned to her call. "Oh, and Cynthia. Make sure Margaret Whitmore's name is included in the statement. If she thought she could do this without consequences, she was mistaken." Jalan let out a slow breath, glancing down at his hands. Maybe justice wasn't always immediate. Maybe it didn't come neatly packaged with an apology. But sometimes justice looked like accountability, and this time he wasn't the one who had to carry the weight of it alone. 3 days later, Belmont Jewelers was everywhere. News stations ran segments about the incident, social media exploded with outrage, and the store's Yelp page had been flooded with one-star reviews. Margaret Whitmore had been placed on indefinite leave, though rumors swirled that she had, in reality, been fired. An official statement had been issued condemning racial profiling, and an internal investigation into Sergeant Blake had been launched after body cam footage revealed how quickly he had moved to detain Jalan without evidence. Jalan scrolled through the news articles on his phone, barely registering the words. He should have felt victorious. Instead, all he could think about was how easily things could have gone another way. If his mother hadn't been who she was, if Doyle hadn't hesitated, if there hadn't been cameras, how different would his story have been? His thoughts were interrupted by a small, excited squeal. "Jalan, Jalan, look what Mom got me." He barely had time to brace himself before Alia launched onto the couch beside him, her wrist extended proudly. The silver charm bracelet gleamed under the living room light, the tiny charms dangling as she waved her hand excitedly. Jalan's chest tightened. "You like it?" Alia grinned. "Are you kidding? It's perfect." She tilted her head, frowning slightly. "But I thought you were going to get it." Jalan hesitated. His mother had clearly bought it for him, making sure his sister still got her birthday present despite everything. But the thought of stepping foot in that store again, of seeing Margaret's face, of being surrounded by the weight of that moment had been too much. "I picked it out," he said finally, forcing a smile. "That's what matters, right?" Aliyah beamed, nodding. "Right." She flung her arms around him in a quick hug before dashing off to show their mother again. Jalin exhaled, watching her go. Maybe it wasn't a perfect ending. Maybe there would never be a perfect ending. But in this moment, Aliyah was happy, and for now, that was enough. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.